realistic modern terms? Was it Galileo or Copernicus?
Not Copernicus, certainly. He was in the pre-telescopic era. No, I think we must say Galileo, although in fact, you know, the very first moon map wasn't drawn by Galileo at all. It was drawn by an Englishman, Harriot, who was tutor to Sir Walter Raleigh at one stage. And he produced a telescopic map of the moon before Galileo did. But certainly, so far as sheer concentrated observation and interpretation goes, in those very early days of telescopic research, Galileo stands alone.
Well, I was fascinated by some of the ways that people in their fantasy talked about going to the moon. What was the story of the man who was going to, Cyrano de Bergerac it was, wasn't it, who was going to strap dew bottles to his body?
This was a lovely idea. He had a very nice means of space travel. He worked it out like this. If you go out in the early morning and look at the grass, you will see that it's covered with dew. Well, if you go out a few hours later when the sun has risen, you will find that the dew has disappeared, and so presumably the sun has sucked it up. So according to Cyrano, if you want to go into space in one easy lesson, all you need do is to collect a lot of bottles, fill them with dew, fasten them round yourself upside down, stand out in the morning, and let the sun do the rest.
And up you'd go.
Well, I haven't tried this myself. I think I'd need an awful lot of dew.
Yes, well, what I'm interested in, too, one of the things that fascinates me, because I really am a layman when it comes to talking about going to the moon, or really when it comes to talking about space or anything of the sort. I'm fascinated by the accuracy, the almost primitive accuracy that some of the early scientists, or maybe even just quasi-scientists, came up with in their ideas about the moon.
Well, of course, the first real scientific novelist of what we can call the modern era was, I suppose, Jules Verne, and his famous book From the Earth to the Moon, which came out in 1865. And he wasn't a scientist himself, but he knew plenty of people who were, and he got his facts right as far as he could. But of course, he did make one fundamental mistake. His method of propulsion to send a projectile from the Earth to the moon was by means of a bullet fired out of a space gun. And this, of course, just isn't going to work. I mean, there are two very good reasons why it won't. First of all, air sets up resistance, and resistance causes heat. And if you fire a bullet through the lower atmosphere at a speed of 7 miles a second, which is the speed you've got to go if you're going to break free from the Earth, well, you're going to set up so much heat by friction that you're going to turn into a puff of smoke. So that's one reason why the space gun doesn't work. And, of course, there's the extra point that even if you forget that one, if you forget about air resistance entirely, and just imagine that you sit yourself inside a space bullet and then get yourself fired up at 7 miles a second, escape velocity, well, it's going to be quite a jerk, isn't it?
Yes.
And I think that anyone who tried that, well, might, I suppose, get to the moon, but would certainly get there in the form of fine jelly spread about inside his projectile.
Yes, well, Jules Verne, admittedly, and in your book you point out that his theories were all wrong, except there is a very interesting picture that you have in your book. It shows the landing in Jules Verne's book, the landing of the space capsule that he had there, a projectile landing in the middle of the ocean, and here it is with an American flag on it, and some people in a whaleboat are circling around, and it looks for all the world very much like the space capsule that we pick up in the Pacific or the Atlantic Ocean, doesn't it?
Well, there was a great deal that Jules Verne did get right. I think the only thing he really got wrong was his basic method of propulsion. If he'd used rockets instead of the space gun, he would have been uncannily accurate. After all, he even got as far as suggesting building a 120-inch telescope on Long Peak, especially to observe this space shot. And after all, that's not so very different from the Palomar telescope of today. And he even got his landing site right.
Yes.
Because his Stones Hill is not so very far from Cape Kennedy. And
yes.
his
launching site, you mean?
Yes, his launching site.
Yes.
And his splashdown area was right, too. No, I think if you forget the fact that he used the wrong method of propulsion, and he got some facts wrong about weightlessness, if you forget those two, he was uncannily accurate.
For any of you living in New York City,